So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about dealing with drama. What are some PQ tactics for family gatherings? So, like the people that know us the best are our family members. And of course, those same family members just know what buttons to push in order to get underneath our skin. So let's talk about some tactics on how we can use PQ to deal with some of our familial situations or some of our situations with our family. Anjanette, why don't you kick us off there?
So I am going to read out
Hmm.
something that I read out during another session that we just talked about, which is conflict with our spouses. But in his book, Positive Intelligence, Shirzad Chamine says that positions are typically held and defended by saboteurs who are by their very nature are not interested in resolutions. They're only interested in being right. So I think, in family dynamics where, we are more of ourselves, we don't have that mask that we have in the office or in the public where we're usually on our best behavior. But generally, when you're in a family dynamic, people are themselves, which is fantastic. But, I think that if we're not self-aware about, someone facing somebody else's saboteurs, it could trigger our own saboteurs. So I think sometimes in family gatherings, we'll have, an aunt or an uncle or that family member, which has a very different position than we have, or could not have a filter and just say things which you might find offensive. And, so that saboteur might trigger your saboteur, which could be the judge, the hypervigilant, the avoider, a myriad of different saboteur reactions. And I think what could happen is that saboteur might say something to whoever says something offensive, and then their saboteur gets stronger and gets fueled, and then that in turn fuels your saboteur, and now you have like an argument. Where if we were to back up and use PQ, if someone says something offensive, there's your indication to take a pause. Like, it's like, oof, I feel my own saboteur arising, but I'm just going to take a moment to do a PQ rep. I'm going to use a sage perspective like navigate, explore. You can become, so what I generally do if, there is someone who might be what in this book is a difficult person, which is someone who has very strong saboteurs, is I start to get really curious. I use a navigate PQ or sage perspective in that it's like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what makes them tick. Like you become really curious about things in their life that might sort of incite them into saboteur mode. Or you could, another trick in the book is to become really curious about the person. What are they wearing? Looking into their eyes and becoming curious about their eye color, or a lot of those type of things, and not judging it at all, just becoming, I think that he uses a word, exploring like an anthropologist. So just sort of going through a data channel. Oh, my aunt is wearing a really pretty pink t-shirt or whatever it is. And what that does is that it stops fueling or the saboteurs that are being activated and are hijacking you, and it moves you into sage perspective to give a little bit more space, perhaps compassion, that then sort of would help move that person from their own saboteur to a sage. And all of this is very ideal, I know, because oftentimes when there is a heat in a moment, it can be very difficult. But what I do think that this book does provide are mechanisms and practices that, with a bit of time can help you in those situations.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
Yeah, so Simon, yourself, how do you deal
Yeah.
with family members?
I guess in a way I'm kind of fortunate. I do have a fairly large family, right, between me and my wife. And sometimes it's in a Chinese restaurant we go by the tables. Each table is about 10 to 12. Sometimes we go up to 3 tables, so it's about 30 people. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of drama. I guess just the cultural and the upbringing. We're just being fairly quiet, right? Obviously, we don't have to talk to everyone. And even if they do say something that could be kind of offensive or triggering our or my saboteur, I think the reaction is to be aware of my own judge, right? I think it's easy for me to start judging others, to say, why is that person like that? Why did that person say that thing? So I think for me to sort of manage this better is to be aware of my judge. Similarly to how to handle arguments with a spouse is to connect with their PQ channel and then use the different powers of a sage to kind of ease that feeling. But like I say, I don't really have to do too much because we are all very calm and quiet, and usually we gather over a meal, a dinner. And when you have nice food, you don't really talk too much, so you just eat.
Yeah.
How about you, Edwin?
Yeah. For me, there's a couple of things that sort of come to mind. So like the first thing is, of course, when you're with family and, if tensions do get kind of high or heated, you got to know within yourself that you cannot control everything. You got to you got to know that you just can't control it, and you got to let things go. And what I do is I personally use the navigate power to try to accept the uncertainty and accept that, hey, I can only focus on the things that I can influence. I can only focus on my response. And then I would say the third thing that I look into and I focus on is I try to set boundaries with my family members. So if things get too heated or the conversation just gets too testy, I'll step away from the conversation, or I'll just let them know, hey, we're not moving in a productive fashion. And as such, I'm going to step away and allow you guys to sort it out. And, and then, I can then sort of come back and, re-engage once people have kind of settled down. But I think sometimes it's also good to break and allow people to just go on their own separate, allow time to sort of start to, break up the tension that could be going on, because some of our family's conversations are a lot of fun. And then when I do engage, or if I'm engaging with someone who, especially in front of the family, it's especially in front of family and in front of others, start by giving them a compliment. And I've started this recently, and it's been working very, very well. Because when you give somebody a compliment, you're providing them validation. They feel good about themselves, and they feel good about themselves in front of others, in front of the people that they care about. And so even if tensions are high and there's a potential for the conflict to even escalate by throwing out a compliment, or one or two, if need be, then that sometimes can activate the sage in the other person and add some reasonableness into the equation. So compliments also work here in order to get people off of their saboteurs and onto their sage, especially in front of their loved ones.
I want to just redo my section because my dog was barking. So we can cut
No,
this
I think
out.
it's fine.
Hopefully
No,
AI.
it's fine.
But I actually want to say something else too.
Sure.
So I want to shorten it. And okay, you can cut this part out.
Yep.
So I think that when we are with family members, so it could be a situation where we might not necessarily just be able to walk away from if someone says something offensive to you, because that may be an option as well. So what I think PQ allows you to do is to be self-aware enough not to step into saboteur mode, because as we've discussed before, someone else's saboteur can give rise to your saboteur. But with PQ, we have that ability to take that pause. I think, Edwin, you mentioned this pause, being able to label the situation and then, rather than judge, to discern, okay, do I need to step away right now? Or is something arising in me that I feel like I want to change this person, or I want to control the situation? And that's never really helpful. I mean, a person may be who they are, and in that moment especially, you're not going to change their position. And I think that this is a larger question, is how do you be with folks who you might not agree with or be aligned with? And how can you still not be in negative feelings, but you might move into feelings of, still be able to hold on to feelings like of joy or feeling like at peace. And I think one of the tips that was either in the book or in the app that Positive Intelligence has as well is, and this has been like a great tip and trick for me is that when, let's say, you might have a relative or someone who might say something that you feel is offensive. It might not have been intended that way, but the impact to you is that it's been offensive, is that you can move into a PQ rep. So a PQ rep could be noticing something about a person, noticing the color of their shirt, noticing their eyes. And then with each PQ rep, Chamine suggests that you begin to visualize a dome of protection around you. Right, so like in Star Trek, it would be like shields up. So every PQ rep that you do, like you notice the color that they're wearing, that's, one layer of the shield. And then another PQ rep could be, feeling your own feet on the ground, and that strengthens the shield around you. So what that allows you to do is every time you do a PQ rep, you are visualizing that you have a layers of protection around you. Which in fact it does do. When you move from your saboteur mode to your sage mode, those comments aren't going to affect you in a negative way. You're going to put a bit of space between it. You might add a bit more compassion in it. You might add some discernment around it and your own boundaries. You might walk away. But I think in effect that PQ can be very useful in guarding against your own generation of negative feelings in that moment.